So this chapter is still about ecology, but we're moving backwards now and just talking about how populations interact with each other. So the very first thing that we talk about is the scope of ecology. So it's just kind of the definitions that you need to know for the chapter. So, by definition, ecology is the study of interactions among all organisms and with their physical environment. So we're talking about how living things interact with each other and how they are affected by their environments as well. So it goes into talking about how ecology and evolution are interacted or interconnected and involved, because ecological interactions act as selection pressures, so things that allow for some things to survive and pass on their genes while other living things don't. So natural selection, think back to there. They act as selection pressures that result in evolutionary change, which in turn affect ecological interaction. So it's a big cycle. And the words that are defined here are habitat. And so habitat is kind of like an individual's address, so where it lives. And then population is defined as all organisms belonging to the same species within an area. So all of the mice that live in the courtyard outside my classroom, that would be the population of mice right there. Then community is all of the populations that live in the same spot and interact with each other. Then we move on to ecosystem, which includes biotic and abiotic factors, so that's living things and non-living things. So that's the weather and the terrain and everything like that. And then lastly is the biosphere, which is all of the zones of the earth, soil, water, and air, where living organisms are found. Then the next section is demographics of a population. So now we're talking more about how a population works. So demography is the statistical study of a population. So we're just looking at actual data here. And so there's some more definitions. Population density is the number of individuals per unit area. So actually talking about how many individuals live in the space there. How packed together are they? And population distribution is the pattern of dispersal of individuals across an area of interest. Textbook definition, basically, how are they distributed? So if we're looking at shrubs, we can think about, are they close together, are they far apart, are they found here and not there? That's what population distribution is. So how is the density spread out over the area where they are? And then limiting factors are those environmental aspects that determine where an organism lives. So there's not going to be a lot of shrubs where there's not a lot of water, if they need water, right? So limiting factors are the ones that living things need and will determine if they can live there or not. And then we talk about 3 different descriptions of population distribution. There's a good figure in your textbook, but it wasn't online. There's clumped, random, and uniform. So if you look at the picture on page 840, you can see them. So there's the shrubs I've been talking about. So the shrubs are clumped. So they live close to each other in random clumps, right? So they can be clumped, random, or uniform. And there's a good picture there. Most living things are found clumped or random. There's not too many uniform, but it does happen. So those are the 3 different patterns of dispersal. Then we move on to population growth, which is the rate of natural increase, which we're going to talk about as R, is dependent on the number of individuals born each year and the number of individuals that die each year. That makes sense. So how much it's increasing is based on how many babies are being born and how many are dying. So one thing that we do consider when we talk about this is that emigration and immigration, so individuals leaving the population and individuals joining the population, we're going to say that they're equal, that does not affect this when we're talking about this in theory. And so biotic potential is defined as the highest possible R. So the highest possible population growth that would be possible if there weren't other factors happening. So there's a couple of things that affect biotic potential or lower it. So these are some of the limiting factors. So one is the number of offspring per reproductive event that survive until the age of reproduction. So if you don't have too many offspring, then you are not going to have the very high biotic potential. The amount of competition within a population. So that obviously will affect how many live and how many die. The age and number of reproductive opportunities and the presence of disease and predators. So all those things will affect how, in theory, how large the population could grow. Then we talk about mortality patterns, not morality, mortality patterns. And so this is when in the lifespan individuals will die. So we talk about all the individuals being born at the same time as a cohort. So we will say, or all of the humans aged 18 to 24 or 14 to 18, those are cohorts. They're all born around the same time, and so we can categorize them together. And then from there we talk about survivorship, and that's the probability of a newborn individuals of a cohort surviving to particular ages. So we describe populations based on their survivorship. So here is a table, this is on page 841 in your textbook, that looks at the life table for a bluegrass cohort. So here are the different cohorts. So cohort of age 0 to 3 months, there's 840 that were observed alive, 121 that died, and so the mortality rate per capita was 0.143. So they all die by the time they get to 24 months. So these are the different cohorts that they chose to look at. And they also, it's important to look at when they're reproducing. So these plants are reproducing the highest from 3 months to 15 months, and really peaking around 6 months to 12 months. So that's when they're most reproductively active. And as they get into the older stages of life, they are not making as many seeds. They're not having as many reproductive events. Then there are the different survivorship curves. So there's a good figure of this on page, I'm guessing 842. There's no page number on this page, 842. And there's 3 different curves that we talk about. So this is like drawing out when we predict a living thing to die, basically. And there's 3 different types. So type 1 is when death occurs after the midpoint of a lifespan. So this is large mammals and humans, basically. So the picture, it's the purple one in the figure in the top left, and then we're also talking about the bluegrasses there. So the bluegrasses show a type 1 survivorship curve. So it stays flat for a while and then levels off as we start reaching the end of the lifespan. That's the type 1 survivorship curve. Then we have type 2, where survivorship decreases at a constant rate throughout lifespan. So this is birds and small mammals, and we see that lizard right there. It's just kind of like there's no real prediction for death. It's just kind of even as it goes along until we reach the end of the lifespan. And then lastly, we have type 3 survivorship curve, which is where most individuals die very young. So this is things like invertebrates and fish. So think about how many eggs fish lay and how many actually survive to being full-grown fish. So most die at the very beginning of the lifespan, and then it stays pretty stagnant until they all die off. So those are the 3 different types of survivorship curves. But then another way to look at a population is by age distribution. So age distribution is, we can define it as pre-reproductive, reproductive, or post-reproductive. So in terms of humans, pre-reproductive would be before puberty, so infancy through childhood. Reproductive is when you're a teenager, basically, a late teenager, through 40s, 50s, and then post-reproductive is the elderly stage. And that's just for humans, but that we can talk about them like that. And so we make these age structure diagrams, and they kind of tell us about the past and the future history of a population. So humans had a very large post-war baby boom. You guys have probably heard about that, with tons of babies being born between the end of the 1940s through the 1960s. So pretty soon, our age structure in the United States is going to be, we're going to have a lot of post-reproductive. So it's going to be heavy on the post-reproductive. So if you categorize your population and you make these age distribution charts, you can really see where your population is going to go. So if you have a lot of pre-reproductive down here, and it narrows, you can say that you're going to be increasing, right? Because you have more young than old. If it's about the same the whole time, you have a stable population, and if you're decreasing, you would see a lot of post-reproductive or reproductive individuals. So we can reflect on how our population is going to change based on these things.